Admiral Jack Morrison stood on the observation deck of Terra Station, watching the latest wave of refugee ships limp into Sol System. The sight never got easier. Each vessel told a story of survival against impossible odds. Kithran battle cruisers, once the pride of their warrior fleets, now drifted forward with hull breaches sealed by whatever scrap metal their crews could find. Some had entire sections missing, held together by emergency force fields that flickered like dying stars. The Veil Ghost ships were even worse. Their advanced cloaking systems, damaged beyond proper repair, caused the vessels to phase in and out of visibility. One moment you could see a sleek destroyer, the next it would vanish completely, then reappear as a twisted shadow of its former self. The constant flickering made Jack's eyes water, but he couldn't look away. These ships had once been invisible death dealers. Now they were barely visible at all. Most heartbreaking were the Torvan city ships. These massive vessels had been entire worlds unto themselves, housing millions of the insectoid species in towering spires and crystalline domes. Now they looked like someone had taken a hammer to a cathedral. Entire sections had been blown away, revealing the honeycomb-like interior chambers where families had lived for generations. Emergency lights blinked frantically where entire neighborhoods used to be. "So, we got another 200,000 refugees requesting asylum," reported Captain Lisa Hayes, her tablet glowing with endless casualty reports. She'd been working 18-hour shifts for 3 months straight, and it showed in the dark circles under her eyes. Jack nodded grimly, his weathered hands gripping the observation rail. The Hegemony War had started 5 years ago as a territorial dispute in the Outer Rim. Nobody expected it to consume 3 entire spiral arms of the galaxy. The Hegemony forces fought with a brutality that shocked even hardened military veterans. They didn't just conquer worlds, they erased them. Entire species had been wiped out, their home systems turned into radioactive wastelands. "What's the status on the Vorthek heavy transport?" Jack asked, pointing to a massive cylindrical ship that looked like it had been through a meat grinder. "Critical life support failures across 40% of the ship," Lisa replied, scrolling through her reports. They got 60,000 refugees aboard a vessel designed for 20,000. The Vorthek are tough, but even they have limits. The Vorthek were living tanks, 8-foot-tall creatures with natural armor plating and 4 arms. They were nearly indestructible in combat, which made seeing them in such desperate condition even more shocking. If the Vorthek were running, things were worse than anyone imagined. A soft chime indicated another ship, requesting docking clearance. Jack looked up to see something that made his blood run cold. It was a Hegemony patrol craft, but it was broadcasting refugee codes. As it got closer, he could see the hull had been painted over with Kithran honor symbols. "That ship," Jack began. "Captured and crewed by survivors," Lisa confirmed. "Intelligence says it's becoming common. Refugee groups are taking Hegemony vessels and using them to rescue more survivors. They know the enemy ships, know how to operate them." Jack smiled for the first time in weeks. That was exactly the kind of tactical thinking he'd been hoping to see. These refugees weren't just running anymore. They were adapting, learning, fighting back with whatever they could find. Earth had become the galaxy's only sanctuary, not because they were the strongest, but because they were the only ones willing to help. The core worlds had closed their borders. The outer colonies were too weak to assist. Even the mighty Centauri Alliance had turned away refugee fleets, claiming they couldn't risk Hegemony retaliation. But Earth's leadership saw something different in these survivors. While other worlds saw a burden, Earth saw an opportunity that might never come again. "Lisa, get me Colonel Mike Bradley from Special Operations," Jack ordered, his mind already racing with possibilities. "And patch me through to General Roberts at command." "Sir, with respect, we're already at maximum capacity. The refugee camps on Luna are overflowing, and Mars colony is reporting supply shortages." Jack turned to face her, and Lisa saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since the war began. Hope. "These aren't just refugees. Lisa, look at them again. Really look." He gestured toward the incoming ships. Every species out there represents the survivors of their military forces. Kithran ship captains who held the line until their worlds died. Veil operatives who escaped impossible situations. Torvan engineers who kept their cities flying even as they burned around them. We're looking at the largest collection of combat veterans in galactic history. Lisa's tablet nearly slipped from her hands as she realized what he was suggesting. And they all have one thing in common, Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. What's that, sir? Jack's smile turned cold as he watched another damaged warship request sanctuary. They want revenge. 6 months later, Sergeant Tom Wilson crouched behind a makeshift barrier on the plains of Montana, watching the most unusual training exercise in human history. The morning sun cast long shadows across the battlefield where 3 different species were learning to fight as one unit. Plasma bolts screamed overhead as Kithran warriors, their blue-scaled skin gleaming with sweat, practiced hit-and-run tactics alongside human marines who were half their size but twice as crafty. Move, move, move. Tom shouted into his comm unit as a squad of mixed fighters bounded from cover to cover. The Kithran warriors looked awkward at first. Their entire culture was built around standing your ground and facing the enemy head-on. Running from a fight went against every instinct they had. But after 6 months of training, they were starting to get it. 20 yards to his left, something shimmered in the air like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Tom grinned. The Veil operatives were getting good at this. Their natural ability to bend light around themselves made them nearly invisible, but humans had taught them something their own people never considered: teamwork. Instead of working alone like mystical assassins, they were learning to coordinate ambushes with heavy weapons teams. A massive explosion rocked the training ground as Torvan engineers tested their latest creation. The insectoid aliens stood 8 feet tall on 6 legs, their 4 arms working with mechanical precision to assemble weapons that shouldn't exist. They had taken human projectile technology and combined it with their own energy manipulation systems. The result was a rifle that fired physical rounds wrapped in plasma fields, devastating against both armor and shields. The key! Tom shouted over the sound of plasma fire and the mechanical clicking of Torvan communication, is that retreat isn't defeat, it's repositioning. A group of human marines demonstrated the concept by falling back under covering fire, then flanking around a hill to strike the enemy from behind. Simple tactics that every human soldier learned in basic training, but revolutionary to species that had fought the same way for thousands of years. Commander Beth Collins, a former Kithran fleet leader, stood nearby watching her people adapt to these strange new concepts. Her scales had turned a deeper blue, a sign of deep concentration among her kind. She was 7 feet tall with natural armor plating and muscles that could crush steel, but she watched these small humans with growing respect. Your species fights without honor, yet achieves victory, she said, her voice carrying the musical tones of a native language. It is enlightening. Captain Dave Turner looked up from the hybrid human Torvan rifle he was calibrating. The weapon hummed with energy as Torvan tech interfaced with human targeting systems. We don't fight without honor, he replied, making fine adjustments to the targeting scope. We fight smart. Honor means protecting what matters, not dying gloriously. This was the heart of human military philosophy that the refugees struggled to understand. Every other species in the galaxy fought according to ancient codes and traditions. The Kithran believed in glorious charges and single combat. The Veil fought like shadows, striking alone and vanishing. The Torvan built massive fortifications and defended them to the death. But humans fought to win, period. A Veil operative suddenly materialized next to Dave, startling him. The creature looked like a cross between a ghost and an elf, with pale, translucent skin and eyes that seemed to look through dimensions. Your tactics are effective, it whispered in a voice like wind through leaves. But they require trust between species who have never worked together. Dave nodded. That was the real challenge, getting natural enemies to fight side by side. The Kithran and Torvan had been at war for centuries before the hegemony threat united them. The Veil had never trusted anyone, period. But desperation was a powerful teacher. Watch this, Dave said, raising his hand to signal the next exercise phase. Suddenly, the training ground erupted in coordinated chaos. Kithran warriors charged forward, not in a traditional honor-bound formation, but in small, flexible units that could break off and regroup instantly. Veil operatives appeared behind simulated enemy positions, but instead of striking alone, they provided targeting information for Torvan artillery that materialized heavy weapons from seemingly empty air. The refugees were shedding their old military traditions like snakes shedding skin. Honor codes that had existed for millennia were being replaced by practical tactics that actually worked. The Kithrin were learning that living to fight another day was more honorable than dying gloriously. The Veil discovered that coordinated strikes were more effective than lone wolf attacks. The Torvin found that mobile warfare could be more devastating than static defense. Under human guidance, they were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a truly integrated military force that combined the best abilities of each species with human tactical flexibility. The Kithrin brought raw physical power and fearlessness. The Veil contributed stealth technology and dimensional manipulation. The Torvin provided engineering genius and heavy weapons. And the humans? The human provided a glue that held it all together, the ability to think outside the box and adapt to any situation. Tom watched the mixed squad execute a perfect flanking maneuver and smiled. 6 months ago, these species couldn't even communicate without translators. Now they were becoming brothers in arms, united by shared loss and a common enemy. The hegemony had created refugees, but Earth was turning them into something far more dangerous, a family with nothing left to lose. The first test came when hegemony scouts probed the outer colonies. Admiral Rebecca Kane coordinated the response from her command ship, the UES Defiant, watching as a new refugee fleet deployed across multiple star systems. Her tactical display showed dozens of mixed-species squadrons moving into position, but their formations looked nothing like traditional military doctrine. All units, this is command, Rebecca transmitted across encrypted channels. Remember your training. Hit fast, hit hard, and get out. Show them what we've learned. The hegemony force was impressive. 12 heavy cruisers and 40 escort fighters, all bristling with the advanced weaponry that had crushed 3 spiral arms. Their black hulls reflected no light, and their energy signatures were designed to intimidate. For 5 years, these ships had been unstoppable killing machines. But they had never faced anything like what was waiting for them. The engagement began in the asteroid belt around Kepler Station. To the hegemony sensors, the field looked empty, just floating rocks and ice chunks drifting in the cold vacuum of space. Their ships moved forward in standard formation, confident that their superior firepower would crush any resistance. That's when the rocks started shooting back. Kithrin battle cruisers had been hiding inside hollowed-out asteroids for 3 days, their crews surviving on minimal life support while they waited. When the signal came, they burst from their hiding spots like predators emerging from caves. But instead of charging head-on like their ancestors would have, they fired precise volleys and immediately dove back into the asteroid field. The hegemony captains were stunned. Kithrin warriors were supposed to fight with honor, standing toe-to-toe until one side was destroyed. This hit-and-run tactic was completely foreign to everything they knew about the blue-scaled aliens. "Contacts bearing 27 Mark IV," shouted a hegemony sensor operator, but his warning came too late. Veil ghost ships materialized behind the enemy formation like nightmares becoming real. But these weren't the same Veil vessels from before the war. Human engineers had modified their cloaking systems, combining Veil dimensional manipulation with human stealth technology. The result was ships that weren't just invisible, they were impossible to detect until they wanted to be found. The lead hegemony cruiser, the Dominion's Fist, took a devastating broadside before its crew even knew they were under attack. Plasma torpedoes tore through its shields like they weren't there, punching holes in armor that should have been impenetrable. But the real surprise came from the Torvin engineering ships. The insectoid aliens had always been builders and defenders, constructing massive static fortifications. Now they were unleashing weapons that defied everything the hegemony thought they knew about physics. A Torvin heavy destroyer, the clicking sounds of its crew's communication echoing through comm channels, fired what looked like a simple missile. But as a projectile flew toward its target, it split into 12 smaller warheads, each one wrapped in a field of crackling energy. The submunition spread out in a perfect geometric pattern, striking the hegemony escort from 12 different angles simultaneously. The enemy ship didn't just explode. It seemed to fold in on itself as the energy fields disrupted the very structure of its hull. What in the void was that? Demanded hegemony Captain Vex Kordak, watching his escort fleet get torn apart by weapons that shouldn't exist. His answer came from an intercepted transmission, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect hegemony standard. "This is Commander Beth Collins of the Free Galaxy Fleet. You are trespassing in protected space. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Kordak almost laughed. Beth Collins had been a respected Kithran fleet commander before the war, known for her honorable tactics and traditional fighting style. "Commander Collins, I knew your father. He would be ashamed to see you hiding behind asteroids like a coward." The response came not as words, but as action. 3 Kithran ships burst from concealment and executed a perfect pincer movement, supported by Veil vessels that appeared and disappeared like flickering shadows. But what made Kordak's blood run cold was the coordination. These weren't 3 separate attacks. It was one perfectly synchronized strike that hit his flagship from angles that should have been impossible to coordinate. His ship's shields collapsed under the assault. Emergency alarms wailed as hull breaches vented atmosphere into space. "They are fighting like ghosts," he reported to his fleet command before another volley destroyed his communications array. No predictable patterns, no honor-bound charges. They are fighting like humans. The battle lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, only 2 hegemony ships escaped, both heavily damaged and carrying reports that would shake the enemy's confidence to its core. Colonel Sam Roberts smiled as he read the after-action reports from his office on Earth. His aide, Lieutenant Kevin Barnes, was still staring at the tactical recordings in amazement. "Sir, they completely outmaneuvered a superior force using tactics I've never seen before," Kevin said, rewinding the footage to watch a Veil ship phase through an asteroid to strike from inside the enemy formation. "Not like humans," Sam corrected his aide, though his pride was obvious. "Like we taught them to think, but with abilities we could never have." The galaxy's refugees had become its newest predators, and they were hungry for payback. When the hegemony launched their massive offensive toward Earth, they came with everything they had. 300 warships, the largest fleet assembled since the war began, moved through hyperspace like a steel tsunami aimed at humanity's heart. Hegemony High Command was confident that overwhelming force would crush the refugee sanctuary once and for all. They expected to find Earth's defenses clustered around the Sol system, desperately trying to protect their home world. Instead, they found themselves fighting shadows that struck from everywhere except where they were looking. Admiral Will Patterson coordinated the defense from his command ship, the UES Liberator, but he wasn't anywhere near Earth. His vessel hung in empty space 3 star systems away, surrounded by a fleet that shouldn't exist according to traditional military thinking. Through quantum entanglement communicators, he was simultaneously commanding operations in 12 different systems. Hegemony Main Fleet has dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Sol system, reported Lieutenant Rachel Martinez from her sensor station. They are scanning for our defensive positions. Will smile grimly. "Let them scan. Commander Beth Collins, what's your status?" The Kithran warrior's voice crackled through the comm from 2 systems away. "Strike Team Beta is in position around the Hegemony fuel depot at Rigel. Torvin engineers confirm the explosive charges are ready. Strike Team Gamma standing by at the Centauri supply hub," added Captain Jake Thompson, his voice transmitted from yet another system. "Veil operatives have identified the ammunition storage facilities." This was human strategic thinking at its finest, while the enemy focused all their attention on one target. You hit them everywhere they weren't looking. The refugee fleets had learned that wars weren't won by glorious battles, but by making it impossible for your enemy to keep fighting. In the Sol system, the Hegemony fleet encountered what appeared to be a massive defensive force. Dozens of ships moved in formation around Earth and Mars, their energy signatures blazing on enemy sensors. The Hegemony commanders congratulated themselves on finally cornering their prey. They didn't realize they were looking at holographic projections and drone ships until it was too late. "Strike Team Alpha, you're clear for the depot raid," transmitted Commander Linda Brooks from her stealth ship, the Shadow Walker. Around her, mixed crews of humans and refugees worked in perfect coordination. At the weapons station, a Torvin engineer's forearms danced across controls while a human gunner called out targeting data. A Veil operative phased partially out of normal space to get better sensor readings while a Kithran warrior prepared boarding charges. The first Hegemony supply depot died in a brilliant flash of light as Torvin explosives turned millions of tons of fuel into a miniature star. The chain reaction was visible from 3 star systems away. "Target destroyed," reported Beth Collins as a mixed squadron emerged from hyperspace around another depot, beginning assault on secondary objectives. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out in system after system. Hegemony supply lines that had taken years to establish were being methodically destroyed by forces that appeared struck, and vanished before defenders could respond. The refugee fleets weren't just attacking randomly. They were following a carefully orchestrated plan that targeted the enemy's ability to wage war. In the Sol system, the Hegemony Fleet commander was growing increasingly frustrated. His massive force was shooting at ghosts while reports poured in about attacks on his rear areas. "Where are they?" he demanded, watching his sensors show empty space where substantial forces should be hiding. That's when Admiral Will Patterson's true masterstroke revealed itself. The defensive fleet around Earth suddenly vanished as the holographic projectors shut down. In their place, a single message broadcast on all frequencies: "You're looking in the wrong place." The climactic moment came when refugee fleets executed a simultaneous multi-system strike that defied everything the galaxy knew about warfare. Using quantum entanglement communications and human coordination protocols, forces spread across 12 systems attacked their targets at exactly the same moment. Hegemony ammunition depots exploded in synchronized destruction. Fuel facilities became infernos that lit up entire sectors. Shipyards that had been building the enemy's war machine were reduced to floating scrap. In 18 minutes, the Hegemony lost more strategic assets than they had in the previous 2 years of fighting. The most devastating blow came when Strike Team Alpha, led by Commander Linda Brooks, penetrated the heavily defended Hegemony Command Station at Proxima. Using veil phase technology enhanced by human tactical thinking, her team materialized inside the station's central computer core. "Remember," Linda whispered to her mixed-species team as they moved through corridors filled with enemy personnel, "we're not here to destroy the station. We're here to send a message." What they did was far more terrifying than destruction. They uploaded a virus created by Torvan engineers that displayed a simple message on every screen in the Hegemony fleet: "We know where you live." Former victims had become apex predators through the uniquely human gift of turning desperate survivors into believers in a cause. The refugees hadn't just learned human tactics. They had become something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. They were no longer running from the Hegemony. They were hunting them. As reports of the coordinated strikes reached Hegemony High Command, panic began to spread through their ranks. They had spent 5 years crushing civilizations through brute force, but now they faced an enemy that fought like ghosts, struck like lightning, and vanished like mist. The hunters had become the hunted. 6 months after the Great Offensive, Admiral Jane Cooper sat in her command center aboard the orbital station Liberty Prime, reviewing reports that would have seemed impossible just 2 years ago. Holographic displays showed star maps across 3 spiral arms, each one telling the same incredible story. Red markers indicating Hegemony control were disappearing daily, replaced by blue markers showing systems that had joined the Free Galaxy Alliance. "Admiral, we're receiving another surrender transmission," reported Lieutenant Dan Miller, his voice carrying a mix of amazement and satisfaction. "The Hegemony garrison at Wolf 359 is laying down arms. That's the 12th system this week." Jane nodded, but her attention was focused on something even more remarkable than military victories. The reports showed that refugee fleets weren't just conquering territories, they were transforming them. Former Hegemony worlds weren't being occupied or destroyed. Instead, they were being invited to join something entirely new. "Pull up the footage from the Vega system Liberation," Jane requested. The main display showed recent recordings of refugee fleets arriving at a Hegemony-controlled world. Instead of the brutal conquest everyone expected, something extraordinary happened. The mixed-species fleet, led by Commander Beth Collins and her integrated crew, had surrounded the planet and broadcast a simple message: "We're here to offer you a choice." The Hegemony garrison commander, Captain Rex Valthorn, had initially prepared for a siege. His forces were dug in, ready to fight to the death as their training demanded. But what happened next broke every rule of interstellar warfare. "Captain Valthorn," Beth Collins had transmitted, her Kithran voice carrying none of the rage or hatred he expected. "I know you. You destroyed my home world of Kyrathia 5 years ago. My family died in that attack." Valthorn had braced himself for the revenge strike that would surely follow. Instead, Beth continued, "But I've learned something from the humans. Revenge doesn't rebuild what we've lost. So I'm offering you and your crew a chance to help us build something better." The Hegemony captain's response had been transmitted across the galaxy. "Why would you spare us? We're your enemies." "You were our enemies," Beth had replied. "Now you're just people who made bad choices." People can change if they want to. What followed was unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of a battle, there was a conversation. Hegemony soldiers, many of whom had been conscripted from conquered worlds themselves, began defecting in massive numbers. They brought with them intelligence about hegemony operations, supply routes, and strategic weaknesses. So, Dan continued, pulling Jane back to the present, the refugee fleets aren't just recruiting former hegemony forces. They are teaching them the same integration techniques we developed here on Earth. Jane smiled as she read the latest intelligence reports. The transformation was spreading like wildfire across the galaxy. Former enemies were working side by side, just like the refugee species had learned to do on Earth. Hegemony engineers were designing new ships alongside Torvan inventors. Former hegemony pilots were flying in mixed squadrons with Kithrin and Vale operatives. The most remarkable example came from the Tau Ceti system, where a former hegemony admiral named Marcus Corvain had not only surrendered his entire fleet, but had volunteered to lead integration efforts in his sector. His final report was playing on Jane's personal display. The refugees didn't defeat us through superior firepower or tactics. They defeated us by showing us who we could become. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission from the field. Captain Ryan Mitchell's face appeared on the screen, broadcasting from a bridge of his ship, the Harmony. Behind him, Jane could see the mixed crew that had become standard across the fleet. Humans working alongside aliens who had been enemies just months before. Admiral, we've made contact with the Hegemony Research Station at Kepler 442, Ryan reported. They want to discuss terms for peaceful surrender. But there's something else. They've been working on biotechnology that could help us restore some of the worlds the hegemony destroyed. Jane felt her heart skip a beat. This was beyond military victory. This was the possibility of healing wounds that had seemed permanent. Are you saying they want to help rebuild what they destroyed? More than that, sir. They want to make it better than it was before. The chief researcher, Dr. Helena Morse, says they've been working on terraforming technology that could restore dead worlds in decades instead of centuries. The refugee fleets had learned humanity's greatest lesson. The best revenge against those who destroy civilizations is to build something better than what was lost. They weren't just defeating the hegemony. They were transforming it into something that could heal the galaxy's wounds. Captain Roy Jackson's final transmission from the Centauri sector summed it up perfectly. We didn't just save them. We showed them that anyone can find redemption in service to something larger than themselves. Across the galaxy, the broken had become the strongest. Earth's refugees had learned to fight like humans while retaining the best of who they were. They had become the galaxy's new guardians, and their brotherhood grew with every world they liberated. The hegemony war was ending not with conquest, but with conversion. Former enemies were becoming family, united by the human belief that everyone deserved a second chance. The galaxy's refugees had found their way home, not to the worlds they had lost, but to something far greater than they had ever imagined possible. *The END*.